I'd like to give a brief content warning before I start this episode. There are going to be mentions of transphobia in this episode. If that's not something you feel like you can listen to right now, I won't blame you if you skip this one. Hello, my name is Amber, and this is You Look Like a Badger, a monthly podcast where I discuss queer cinema. It is officially July. This month, I'm going to talk about fantasy, and the film that I picked has a somewhat tenuous link to the fantasy genre, but it does count, and it is also unfortunately relevant to what I usually discuss on this podcast. If you've been listening since the beginning of this year, then you'll know that the films that I pick for this season have been offensive or controversial or just not really well liked. So this pick might seem a bit strange, but if you've gone back to rewatch it recently, you'll know why I'm doing an episode on it. So the film that I've picked is Dude, Where's My Car?
So we'll go to the twins' house, right? We'll give them their anniversary gifts, and then we'll apologize for trashing their house, and then we get our special treats. Dude, where's my car? Where's your car, dude? Dude, where's my car? Where's your car, dude? Dude, where's my car? Where's your car, dude? Did I drive last night? I think so.
Dude, Where's My Car is a fantasy stoner comedy that came out in the early 2000s, starring Ashton Kutcher and Seann William Scott. It follows two friends as they try to recall the events of the evening before, getting into various hijinks involving aliens, a cult, and men in their 20s who behave like high school bullies. It would be too reductive to call this film of its time. Its impact is tepid in terms of comedy films people want to remember, bar a few select scenes that only have value because they're quotable. This film is mostly boring, hinging on the appeal of the two leads. It's mostly forgettable, though somewhat fascinating in how it depicts homosexuality and transness within the fantasy comedy genre. In terms of awards, this film was nominated for a Teen Choice Award for Choice Comedy, the highest accolade, and Ashton Kutcher was also nominated for multiple Teen Choice Awards and an MTV Movie Award for Breakthrough Male Performance. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of 17% and an audience score of 47%. On Letterboxd, it has a 2.6. So yeah, this film is strange because it feels like something that's remembered more fondly than it's probably worth remembering. When people want to defend quote-unquote offensive comedy, or they want to show how we kind of don't have like good comedy movies anymore, this movie gets like thrown about, and you'll see like screenshots of the film, and watching clips from the film is probably the best way to watch it, because I would argue that this film has aged poorly, but only really in the sense that it probably wasn't that funny in the first place. I feel like it's a film that has been kind of overrated, and the people who claim to like it probably haven't sat down to watch it in a while, because it does have elements that I suppose could be fun, but because it's all being filtered through a very specific perspective, comes across as quite mean in places, and in other places the rest of it is just boring. Like, the whole film feels like it kind of only has one joke. I'm gonna, get into later on the components of the stoner comedy, but I just think that this is one of those films that probably doesn't deserve the praise it has in your memory. Like, I watched this as a teenager and thought, wow, this is really funny and I like it. And I think I'd always kind of had like positive memories associated with it. So when I was rewatching it, I was mostly just underwhelmed by how long it felt, by how long the jokes seemed to go on for, and by how the funny bits of it that you see float around the internet really are the only bits worth remembering, and that everything else is kind of mediocre. But let's get some outside perspective, because I have collected some reviews from Letterboxd. I'll read a few of them now. Darth Icky said, "I liked it when he said, 'Dude, where's my car?' 14 times. Yep. That is kind of the mode this movie takes, just repeating the same joke over and over again. Have another review from Andrew, who says, Bill and Ted's excellent adventure for 9-year-olds. Again, very true. I think in terms of actual comedy and plot and just like energy, I guess, Bill and Ted is just like a much better fantasy film. It's a much better stoner comedy. It has like legitimately funny moments, and the two leads, yes, they are like the stoner leads, but they also have energy. And they're just like very engaging to watch, whereas I wouldn't argue the same for the two leads in this film. Last but not least, Justin LaLiberty says, oof, found a whole lot of transphobia in the search for that car, huh? Feel like a lot of people forget about how much this film kind of hinges on transphobia, actually. It's a massive part of the film, which I will go into. But yeah, definitely forgot about that. It definitely like sours the taste in your mouth. But I will say now, I'm not like mourning the loss of Dude, Where's My Car? I wouldn't argue it's like the peak of all comedy. It's the bestest film in all of the films that's ever been. I feel like it's definitely something that can be let go of, and it wouldn't really impact anything that much. Again, I think people put more weight on this film. They're remembering it from when they first watched it, which was probably when they were 12, and that experience was probably quite formative, which is why I think many people tend to cling to particularly comedy movies that kind of just aren't funny anymore, but because they watched them and it was very comforting for them to watch them, they feel the need to defend the worst parts of them, even when it's really not worth your time. When I was researching kind of like interviews or opinions on what people thought of this film now, I had to read the term woke teens so many different times, because there were like many, I guess, like late millennial journalists who had a problem with teenagers who didn't like this movie, which, you know, makes perfect sense. The comedy of the early 2000s, for the most part, will not have aged that well. In what world is this film going to be like timeless? Arguing that people don't like this film because they're too woke and they're too politically correct and they don't know how to have fun. It's just, I think it's a wrong analysis. I think you really need to look at this film for what it is, and it's not a film that's worth the time, I guess. It's not worth like losing your mind over. Like I said, if I have to read the term woke teens ever again, I might just lose my mind. I said a lot of quite mean things. This is definitely not the worst film that I've watched for this podcast, but it's just like a disappointing film, because I think when something is bad, I think that's a lot more interesting, and I can laugh at stuff that's bad. I mostly didn't laugh at this film. This film is a comedy, so I think it was more just the fact that it was mostly mediocre and just like not really worth the like 83 minutes that were there. This definitely could have been like a sketch, you know, like a 3-minute sketch. There is nothing about this that needed to be a full movie, and I think that's more where I'm coming from here. It's more of I wished that this film had aged better. And it's not even that I don't like stoner comedies, because I do. I think they're a very interesting genre. Yeah, I'm probably going to get into talking about the film now, so I'll give a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen this film, then I am about to talk about it in detail. Is this a film that I'd recommend you go watch if you haven't? No, but I mean, if you are like, I won't listen to a podcast if I know it's going to spoil the film, then maybe. You could like just skim through it, watch it at double speed. I will say, if you are someone that watched this film as a teenager and you haven't gone back to revisit it, to go and watch it and actually see what your opinion is now. Because it's all well and good living with the opinion that you like this film, but actually watching it is a different matter. So if spoilers are really going to affect the experience of listening to this episode, then go watch the film. I'll be here when you get back, and we can talk about stoner comedies.
Wait a second. Let's recap. Last night, we lost my car, we accepted stolen money from a transsexual stripper, and now some space nerds want us to find something we can't pronounce. I hate to say it, Chester, but maybe we should cut back on the shivvying. Thanks, dude.
The stoner comedy. What an interesting genre. I think it's really a genre that I associate with the 90s and the early 2000s, where I think the conversation around marijuana was more prevalent, and I think appealing to a teenage audience was very much in the forefront of people's minds. But in terms of like the actual what the stoner comedy hinges on, I'd say I found an article in Little White Lies that kind of discusses the genre, and the bulk of them, they hinge on watching non-masculine men, so like nerds or stoners, and they are usually played by comedians that you know and love. They try to perform masculinity in like a silly way. Their funniest moments, this is a direct quote from the article, their funniest moments rely on repetition and on extending a joke past the point of exhaustion until it becomes funny again. And with that, there's kind of vicarious disengagement, I guess. The idea that you can just like turn your brain off and relax and just like laugh at something silly is very much what the stoner comedy is about. It's a genre that positions itself as kind of apolitical, and I think, you know, that's kind of the case of all comedy with usually like a white male perspective. I know, but I think it positions itself as apolitical, and in doing that, it's trying to convince you that this is just silly and that you don't have to think about it too hard, you know, and that can be fun until it's not, until you're part of the group that's being, I guess, like made fun of or positioned as violent or angry or disgusting or justified in being made fun of because of how you're being positioned in the film. Dude, Where's My Car is told from the perspective of two useless stoner boyfriends who they don't know how to look after themselves, and they wake up and they have a fridge full of chocolate pudding, and isn't that weird? They're bad at their jobs, they forget to deliver the pizza even though that's their job, and then their boss bursts in the door and is like, why didn't you deliver the pizza? And they're like, we don't know, we're silly stoner guys. And they forget their girlfriend's anniversary, they buy them cheap chocolates as presents, and then they eat most of them. They have somehow managed to not have sex with their girlfriends after a year of dating because they're just so useless. And as a result, everything that is the opposite of these men is positioned as antagonistic. So people who have jobs, people who aren't men, people who aren't white, people who are sober and they're rational. In the case of this film, not cis or not straight, they are positioned as antagonistic or actively violent. So there's like this group of, you know, they're definitely adult men, but they behave like high school bullies, and they are antagonistic and violent. They hunt down the main characters. They are bigoted against stoners. And this is just like one example of people in the film, pretty much everyone in the film, being antagonistic towards these seemingly harmless men who are just like hanging out and smoking weed and being cool and silly, and everyone else is the crazy ones. They're positioned in their like chilled out attitude as stupid, definitely, but also as kind of like the only people who are reacting calmly to situations, and therefore the people that we are invited to align ourselves with, because we are not reacting irrationally to someone forgetting our anniversary or forgetting to do a job or sticking our arm under a glass shield to steal some paperwork. We're not being annoying on the tannoy when trying to order food. We're the normal ones. We are invited to laugh at the main protagonists, but we are also positioned to vehemently distrust and dislike everyone else in the film. And everyone else in the film, bar the hyper-masculine men in their 20s who are behaving like high school bullies, present like some kind of difference, whether it's women, whether it's trans people, whether it's people of colour. We are kind of positioned to see them as the butt of the joke, for the most part because this is a comedy, but also as the forces kind of standing in these two men's way, preventing them from reaching their full potential. Because all they want to do is they want to sit at home, smoke weed and eat pizza and watch the Discovery Channel. But they can't do that because they have to go and be responsible adults. And when you do this, it kind of, I want to say it undermines the apolitical aspect of the stoner comedy, but I'd argue that it's a feature, not a bug, because I think a lot of American comedy for a long time is from a white, cis, male, straight perspective, right? A lot of what has been seen as funny, I guess, is difference. And because that perspective is seen as the default, there isn't a lot of difference to poke fun at. So you externalize out, right? You poke fun at stuff that doesn't make sense to you because it seems strange and weird and you don't understand it. So therefore everyone else doesn't understand it. And I suppose the worst thing about this is that it has been and continues to be incredibly profitable to make comedy like that, to not question why something has been funny or what about it specifically has been funny. And I guess when you position difference as something to be laughed at, you are not inviting the audience to question that structure of power and what it is about that that's meant to be making you laugh. So I will talk about women just as like a broad example, because a big element of the stoner / sex comedy is women as objects, which I know that seems like very obvious, but I think within the stoner comedy specifically, because the two main characters aren't particularly cool or they aren't particularly hypermasculine, we're meant to feel less weird about the objectification that goes on because it's what they deserve, surely, because they aren't brutish and they aren't doing sexually harassing things in a traditional sense. They're just doing it in a different way. This kind of positioning of, well, they deserve to objectify women because they're so downtrodden by how fucking stupid and silly and how much of a loser they are. Like, they deserve to stare at women and make weird comments and grope them, I guess, because in having to, I guess, endure the trials and tribulations of a comedy like this where they're constantly being humiliated and antagonized, the reward is a sexy woman who is very, very hot and that will have sex with you. That is kind of the way that women are positioned in this film. So we have, I guess, like a couple of groups. We have the blonde lady whose name I can't remember, but she's a girlfriend of one of the very manly man. And she's kind of exhausted with their behavior and would prefer someone nice and normal. We also have the two girlfriends who are positioned as nagging shrews who are constantly angry at them for forgetting to do boyfriend stuff. Then there's also the sexy aliens who are intimidating and fantasy-like and immediately want to have sex with them in order to obtain a continuum transfunctioner. I guess what I'm basically saying is that women in this film function as a means of withholding sex or a means of completing tasks in order to obtain sex. They are, in a sense, otherworldly, and at the same time they are the keys to unlocking a secret kind of manhood for these two men. It's positioned as a coming of age story where by the end of the film we believe that they deserve to have sex, and in order to do that you have to position women as incredibly hot and worthy of ogling, so the camera does that as well as the two men, but also withholding. And what the two men have to do, and also by extension the teenage boy audience has to do, is prove their masculinity, and then naturally women will want to have sex with you. That's what will happen. In terms of race, this film is not particularly original in how it depicts people of colour. But I will say it is interesting that every person of colour in this film is some kind of antagonist. It's honestly insane. The first instance, I guess, is their boss, who is a black man. He's very angry. He runs the pizza delivery place that they work at, and he's very violent. He breaks down the door off its hinges. The next person, I think, is the person on the tannoy who keeps saying "and then." It's a joke that goes on for far too long. There is a black woman at the impound who nearly breaks Chester's fingers off. I think there are very few people of colour in this film, but the ones that are there, they mostly serve to present to the audience that the two main characters, Jesse and Chester, are being constantly victimized for no reason. I think to an extent it's meant to represent the paranoia that can come with marijuana use. I didn't mean to sound like a narc. Sorry. But like I said, this is not an apolitical thing. When you have so few people of colour in your film and all of the people of colour that are there are antagonistic towards the main characters, you are, I guess, like teaching your audience that there is a certain kind of victimhood that white men experience, and most of the people in this film, not just the people of colour, but their impact is definitely significant, is the two main characters interacting with people that are different and then being presented in contrast as the more laid back and chilled out and more cool alternative. And once again, this is presented as apolitical. This is just seemingly a fact of the film that this is what the world is. With that being said, there is a specific scene that I would like to talk about in this section. The film discusses homosociality, which is basically the way that people of the same gender kind of interact with one another, the way that they bond with one another. It's almost always bonding over being really silly and stupid or gawking at pretty women. That's the bulk of the film. But there is a specific scene that I would like to talk about because I'm in two minds about it, because it feels strange to watch, but also kind of fascinating. So I'm just gonna describe it. It's the car scene with Fabio. So here's what happens. They pull up to a red light, and it's that kind of trope of we're gonna drag race at the red light. What it ends up turning into is kind of a game of gay chicken, I guess, where Fabio will do something with his girlfriend, like put his arm around her or kiss her on the mouth, and Jesse and Chester will copy for some reason. They legitimately kiss each other. See, here's the thing. I want to, for the life of me, to reclaim this scene as like a legitimate queer moment of just these two men bonding over, I guess, making someone else uncomfortable. Unfortunately, all I could picture when I was watching this film was how it would be received by its teenage audience. And I feel like the reaction to this scene would not have been, wow, they actually went there and kissed each other on the mouth. They must be like really close. No, what I feel like actually was the intended reaction of this scene was disgust. In the same way that I'm going to discuss in the next section, trans women's bodies are used as like an object of disgust. I think that this scene is also meant to make you go, ugh. What? Oh my god, I can't believe they did that. Because straight men like to make fun of each other for being gay. And I feel like these two characters, who for the most part are non-traditional men, are in this instance meant to be laughed at. And it's not meant to be like this moment of secret queerness between these two characters. It's meant to be a joke for a straight audience to laugh at. And, you know, I think that kind of is the vibe that comes with a lot of this homophobia adjacent humor. Because if you try to call this homophobic, most people will be like, we don't hate gay people. Having being uncomfortable or being disgusted by two men kissing is in fact a symptom of early 2000s homophobia. I don't feel like the relationship between Jesse and Chester is meant to be anything more than a joke that we're meant to be laughing at and not with. It is interesting. I'm sure there are definitely some gay teenagers from the early 2000s who watched this scene and had an awakening. There are plenty of films that I know for a fact were meant to be like specifically catered for a straight audience, right? But I like love and have found like really formative. So I'm not putting anyone down who legitimately thinks fondly of this scene and is like, wow, that was really interesting and weird that was in this film. I'm thinking of it within the context of the film, and I can't see it as anything more than a joke that queer people aren't invited in on.
So, just how super special can a slippery lap dance be?
What the hell are you thinking, throwing around my money like that? That wasn't part of the plan. I'm a gender-challenged male.
What does that mean?
Oh, dude, you're a dude!
Let's talk about trans women, because this film insisted on talking about them, and we're going to do that here too. I suppose I've mainly talked about Dude, Where's My Car as a comedy so far. I have mentioned aliens, but I think that's because the fantasy element is more within the absurdity of the situation that the two lads are in. And I think the transphobia in the film is a part of that. So I think in a lot of comedies, like a lot of films in general, trans people, mostly trans women, their existence itself is presented as absurd. The idea that someone would transition is presented as the joke. I apologize for having to say this sentence, but there was a really good article on Buzzfeed. I know, all right, but I did read it. It was a really well-written article. So let's all just calm down. There was a really good article written on BuzzFeed specifically about transphobia in comedy. Trans feminine people are nearly always presented as villains and objects of derision or disgust, especially in comparison to conventionally attractive cisgender love interests. They are often inserted into a comedy's narrative to fulfill a gross-out shock factor, and that's how the character of Tanya functions in this film. So she is a stripper who for some reason decides to give Jesse a free lap dance, which I'm sure absolutely never happens. This is obviously mostly a fantasy fulfillment film, so it's fine, we'll accept it. When comedy films in particular want to let you know that a character is a trans woman, what they will do is they will have that actor very suddenly get a deep voice, even though they never had one prior to the interaction. And after it is revealed, and when I say revealed, she lifts up her dress and you see like her genitals bulging through her underwear. Jesse is disgusted and he's screaming and wiping his tongue. So let's just look at this interaction. What we have just seen is a character that Jesse found attractive. This is a woman who's working in a strip club. Jesse wanted a lap dance from her. Very suddenly, once it was revealed that she was trans, she's no longer someone that Jesse finds attractive, and she has actively tricked in like the reveal of her genitals and of her quote unquote true voice. She has tricked this man into finding her attractive because, you know, that's what women do. They pretend to be attractive and then they suddenly evil and they try to steal your soul. That's what women do. So I'm going to quote from that BuzzFeed article, which goes on to say, the audience is also supposed to laugh because a man has been deceived by these women, and straight male viewers can take comfort since the humiliation is not their own. The way trans characters are used and abused exemplifies the lengths heterosexual cisgender men will go to demonize trans women in order to deny them womanhood, as well as to reaffirm their own desperately fragile masculinity. I didn't realise how savage that article was going to be. But I agree. That's what this scene was meant to do. Once it was revealed that Tanya was a trans woman, the film has to distance itself from her. She is actively a villain in the film, and her trans element is specifically part of this. The fact that she deceived Jesse is paralleling the fact that she is asking him to be a part of her criminal activities. Post the Kitty Cat Club, she is presented as strong and intimidating and actively threatening. Okay, so if you want to know something, there is a lot that cannot be reclaimed from this film. I am unfortunately very invested in Tanya and her trans boyfriend Patty. Like, I'm sorry, I just was. And I know that they're meant to be like a joke and it's meant to be like gross that they're in a relationship with one another, and that Jesse and Chester, they ask each other if they should be grossed out when they see Tanya and Patty kissing. And like, I get that. It's all positioned as awful and gross and that we should hate them and that they're meant to be like evil and the worst. But there is a part of me that's just like, where is the sequel with Tanya and Patty? I'm like, I want to see two trans criminals going around intimidating cis men. That would be so much fun to watch. Like, could you imagine if someone smart wrote a spin-off with those characters? I think that would be so much fun. The transphobia in this film is there as, I guess, like, further on from like the first section. It's there as like further difference that the supposedly normal cis straightness of the main characters can be measured up against. I am obviously very much in favour of trans people committing crimes and making cis men feel uncomfortable. This film does not agree, and the fact that we aren't argued to kind of question that at all is an issue, because trans women have so few like genuine characters that are like rounded and interesting. So it's frustrating because so much of transphobia in comedy is just this same joke of a woman with a dick, and then that's the end of the joke because a woman with a dick. That's the absurdity. That's what the comedy is meant to be. And it wasn't really funny the first time, but the fact that it just kind of kept being repeated because nobody who wrote comedies in the early 2000s had actually spoken to a trans person or met them in real life. So their very existence kind of seemed an absurdity to them. It's more just like disappointing, and just like, I'm sure that so many trans writers and directors wanting to make like a wacky stoner comedy with trans people at the center, but they haven't had the chance to. And yet there have been like so many rip-offs of the same stoner comedy with the same jokes about trans people. It's more frustrating than anything. Like, it's hard to be offended by a film that was made in the 2000s. It's kind of frustrating that it doesn't feel like much has been done to rectify it. And like, there's very little like genuine challenges to it, and I suppose we can't expect that much from the mainstream. I want like good trans comedy. I think that would be really fun to watch. Hopefully we can get there at some point. We probably know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyway. Does this film look like a badger? Yeah, it does. There's no way around it. I think this film got like maybe one genuine laugh out of me. I think I maybe laughed another time out of purely nostalgia reasons. There's like the dude sweet scene where they got the back tattoos. I think I laughed at that because I remembered that scene. It's an iconic one. It's the one that people usually quote, other than the titular dude, where's my car? I think everything else was just nostalgia. This is clearly intended for a teenage audience in the early 2000s, and a teenage audience in the early 2000s doesn't exist anymore. So I think I don't know that I was going to gel with it that much. It doesn't quite have the lasting appeal of, say, a Bill and Ted, or even like a Harold and Kumar, which I think has aged a lot better than this film has, because the two leads in those films are more charming and less transphobic. In terms of the transphobia, it is somewhat interesting that the trans woman at the end of the film is like a recurring character and not just like a sight gag, but also the trans woman doesn't die. I don't mean to sound incredulous, but that rarely happens. She just like runs away with her trans boyfriend. And I think, I don't know, maybe that's the most radical thing this film could offer, which is sad, but unfortunately is a very true and correct statement. I can actually recommend you films that could exemplify what this film was trying to do and what it kind of failed at for me personally. So I'm gonna begin with a stoner comedy called Smiley Face. It was directed by Greg Araki, my favourite gay boy, starring Anna Faris, and it is genuinely hilarious and pretty much has the exact same plot. It's basically Anna Faris getting very, very high on the same day that she has to run a bunch of errands, and it is very funny and genuinely so much fun to watch and not transphobic, which is nice. It's nice that that was the case. Another film that I'm going to recommend is a short film called Terror Sisters. It's a short French film about a group of trans women. They kind of get together in this cafe and they come up with fantasies of what they want their future to be and how that kind of clashes with a cisgender world. Because I'm very, very nice, I'm going to give you a third recommendation, mainly because I think it kind of mirrors the adventure element of Dude, Where's My Car? It also has an excellent title. So the film I'm going to recommend is To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. This is a film about a group of drag queens who are traveling across the country in their car, and they find themselves stranded in a small town where they try to pass as women until they get their car fixed. It's about like navigating the set ideas of gender. It's surprisingly heartwarming, definitely funny, and a lot more transgressive than I'd say Dude, Where's My Car was ever going to be. I think the three leads, I think it's Patrick Swayze, Wesley Snipes, and John Leguizamo. They give like very genuine performances, and these were all like straight and cis men. So yeah, I'd recommend that film as well. We are done. The internet has just gone off in my house, so that's very fun for me. I want to thank you very much for listening. I should be doing my next podcast in August where I discuss queer drama. I think I have a good pick for next month. It's going to be interesting. If you like to stay updated, please make sure you follow me on Twitter at LikeABadgerPod. Follow me on Spotify and YouTube and TikTok for the full episodes and teasers. If you'd like to see more of my work, you can find my writing at ambercanwalk.com. And if you'd like to make a donation to me, then you can donate to my Kofi and my PayPal, which I'll put in the description. All of the sources that I've used are also in the description. I want to thank you again for listening, and I hope to see you again in August.